The judge's gavel struck down, and a mother was called a kidnapper right in front of the 3 children she had raised. No one in the courtroom knew that the elderly woman bowing her head there was the only person who had saved those children from a childhood of abandonment. Evelyn Brooks sat motionless on the defendant's bench, her frail hands gripping an old wooden box, resting on her lap so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She did not look up immediately, not because she was afraid, but because she knew that if she looked into her daughter's eyes in this moment, every memory would come flooding back like an uncontrollable storm. "Your Honor," Vanessa Brooks' voice rang out, sharp and clear enough that no one could ignore it. "My mother kept my children for 12 years without my consent." The room seemed to hold its breath. A few whispers spread. A few glances turned toward Evelyn filled with doubt, even disdain. In their eyes, she was just a stubborn, poor old woman, someone who had crossed the line, someone who had taken away her daughter's right to be a mother. Vanessa stood straight, her shoulders steady, her light-colored suit fitted perfectly, her hair neatly tied, every movement radiating control. This woman did not look like a victim. She looked like someone fully prepared for this battle. Behind Evelyn, the 3 children sat close together. Ryan, the eldest, clenched his hands tightly, his eyes never leaving the woman standing before the court. Lily, with her hair tied low, kept her head down, her lips pressed together, and Noah, the youngest, leaned close to his brother, his wide eyes trying to understand what was happening. They said nothing, but their silence carried more weight than any accusation. Judge Harold Bennett looked down from his high seat, his aged yet sharp eyes moving between the 2 women. "Mrs. Evelyn Brooks," he said in a deep voice, "do you have anything to say regarding this accusation?" Evelyn lifted her head, and in that moment the entire courtroom realized that her eyes were not weak. They did not tremble. They did not plead. They were simply tired. "I did not kidnap anyone," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I only raised the children my daughter left behind." A wave of murmurs spread. Vanessa immediately stood up. "That is a lie," she almost shouted, her voice breaking for the first time. "I did not abandon them. I just had health issues. I needed time." Her lawyer, Richard Collins, quickly placed a hand on her shoulder and guided her back down. "Your Honor," he said calmly and professionally, "my client went through severe postpartum depression. She required medical treatment. During that time, Mrs. Evelyn took advantage of her vulnerable state to keep the children and gradually cut off the connection between mother and children." Nods appeared in the crowd, a familiar story. A young mother who was ill, a greedy grandmother, a family tragedy. It sounded reasonable. It sounded easy to believe. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief second. She had expected this. 12 years of silence. 12 years without anyone asking her a single question. And now, with just a few statements, she had become the guilty one. The judge looked at her, his voice slower. "I understand that caring for 3 children for a long time is not easy, but if the biological mother wants to regain custody—" "Your Honor," Evelyn interrupted. The courtroom fell silent. Her voice was not loud, but there was something in the way she spoke that could not be ignored. "Before the court makes any decision," she said slowly, "there are things that need to be known." She raised her hand. The old wooden box, darkened with time, was lifted into view of everyone. An ordinary object, but the way she held it was like holding a secret that could destroy everything. Vanessa, for the first time, her eyes wavered. "Inside this," Evelyn said, her voice lowering, "is the truth of 12 years ago." A long silence followed. The judge leaned slightly forward. "What kind of evidence?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked at Vanessa, not with anger, but with something more painful, disappointment. "It is the reason why," she said, each word falling slowly. "After 12 years without a single call, without a single payment, without a single inquiry, my daughter suddenly appears today with a lawyer and calls me a kidnapper." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Some gazes began to change direction. Vanessa swallowed hard. "Mom, don't do this," she whispered, quiet enough that only Evelyn could hear. But Evelyn heard clearly. She gave a faint smile. "It has been 12 years," she said. "I have been waiting for you to tell the truth." The judge tapped the gavel lightly. "Mrs. Evelyn, if you have evidence, the court will consider it. But first, I want to hear the whole story from the beginning. Evelyn took a deep breath, the wooden box still in her hands, heavier than ever. Inside it were not just documents, but memories, sleepless nights, moments of despair, the things she had hidden to protect the very children sitting behind her. She closed her eyes and returned to the story did not end with a mother walking away. It became far more complex, colder, and more ruthless than anyone in the courtroom could have imagined. 12 years ago, when the door closed behind Vanessa, Evelyn stood there for a long time, not because she did not know what to do, but because she was trying to convince herself that everything was only temporary, that her daughter would come back, that no mother could leave her children forever. But the days that followed quickly crushed that fragile belief. On the first day, the children asked when their mother would return. Evelyn smiled and said soon. By the third day, Ryan grew quieter, his eyes no longer those of a normal child, but filled with caution and a maturity beyond his age. Lily clung to her worn doll as if it were the only thing keeping her safe. And Noah cried every night, not just from hunger, but from the absence of a mother's familiar warmth. A week passed with no calls, no messages, no sign that Vanessa even remembered the 3 children she had given birth to in the courtroom. Evelyn stood straighter, her voice no longer trembling but steady like a stream flowing over old wounds. She said she had tried to find her daughter. She had gone to the apartment where Vanessa used to live, and what she found was not an explanation, but an empty door and a story completely different from what Vanessa had just presented in court. The landlord said. Vanessa had already left before that, leaving no address, not paying rent, and abandoning many things in the apartment. The lawyer, Richard, tried to interrupt to steer the story back in his client's favor, but Evelyn did not look at him. She only looked at the judge and said there was a witness. There was evidence. And it was that very landlord who had given her a box. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted when the box was mentioned. Vanessa lifted her head, and for the first time there was a flicker in her eyes. Not because she feared losing, but because she feared something being exposed. The judge asked for clarification, and Evelyn said they were the things Vanessa had left behind: clothes, documents, the very things Vanessa had chosen not to take when she left. Richard objected, arguing that personal belongings were irrelevant to the current custody case, but Evelyn cut him off, her voice not loud but carrying a force that made every objection seem weak. She said it was through that box that she realized her daughter had no intention of returning. She recounted that in the early days, she still believed Vanessa would come back. She kept everything untouched, the room uncleaned, as if waiting a little longer would bring everything back to how it was. But when she opened that box, all hope collapsed. Inside were the children's birth certificates, medical records, essential documents needed for school enrollment, things no mother would ever leave behind if she intended to return. The judge began to understand. It meant Vanessa had prepared to leave not for a few days, but forever. Vanessa shook her head in denial, but could not find a single word strong enough to break the truth forming in the courtroom. Evelyn did not stop. She said the most painful part was not that her daughter left, but how she left, calculated, prepared, and fully aware. She emphasized that Vanessa did not just abandon her children, but arranged everything so she would not have to come back. Each of her words felt like another layer of a mask being stripped away in front of everyone. Vanessa lowered her head, tears falling, but no one rushed to believe those tears anymore, because what had just been revealed had changed how everyone in the room saw her. Evelyn continued, saying that inside the box there was not only paperwork but something else, something she herself had not wanted to find but could not ignore. The tension grew as she paused, as if giving everyone a moment to brace themselves. The judge asked her to be clear, and Evelyn slowly opened the box, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of memories returning in vivid detail. She took out an old piece of paper, folded many times, its edges yellowed with age, but the writing still clear. As the paper was lifted, Vanessa suddenly stood, her voice no longer controlled as before. She said stop, but Evelyn did not stop. She said that 12 years ago, her daughter had not only left, but had also left this behind. And she placed the paper before the judge. He leaned down to read, and the expression on his face changed visibly from calm to shock. The entire courtroom fell into absolute silence as everyone waited for him to speak. Evelyn looked straight at Vanessa, her eyes no longer those of a mother protecting her child, but of someone who had waited far too long to speak the truth. And finally, she said it was a written relinquishment of parental rights, written in Vanessa's own hand. And in that moment, the entire story changed. No longer a simple case, but a brutal unveiling of a truth Vanessa had never wanted to face. The rain fell heavily that afternoon, each drop striking the roof like the urgent drumming of a storm drawing near. And Evelyn Brooks had no idea that the real storm was not outside, but standing right at her door. Vanessa appeared with the 3 children behind her, not with the presence of a mother, but like someone running from her own life. Her eyes red, her hair disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, as if she had not slept for days. Ryan stood behind her with a gaze far too hardened for a child. Lily clutched her worn doll as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. And Noah cried endlessly, his small voice persistent like a wound that would not heal. Evelyn opened the door and did not ask a single question. She simply pulled them inside as a natural instinct of a mother. She did not know at that moment whether she was opening the door to her daughter or to a fate she would never escape. Vanessa set a plastic bag on the floor. Inside were a few scattered clothes, not folded, not clean, and not enough for 3 children. She said it would only be a few weeks, that she needed time to deal with things, that everything would be fine. But her voice held no belief, only haste and avoidance. Evelyn asked what the problem was, whether she needed help, whether something had happened to Jason, but Vanessa only shook her head, repeating that it would only take a few weeks and everything would be fine. And then she bent down and kissed each child quickly, more like an obligation than something from the heart. Ryan did not react. Lily held her mother's hand for a second before letting go, and Noah kept crying. But Vanessa had already turned away before his cries could reach her. The door closed, and the taxi waiting outside quickly carried her away. The 3 children ran to the window, calling for their mother, but all they saw was the car disappearing into the heavy rain. In that moment, Evelyn still believed it was temporary. She still believed her daughter would come back, because she could not imagine a mother doing otherwise. That evening, Ryan asked when their mother would return. Evelyn said soon. Lily said nothing and simply sat still. And Noah slept in her arms, but would sometimes startle awake crying. The days that followed stretched endlessly. Each passing day wore down. Evelyn's hope a little more. She tried calling Vanessa's old number but could not reach her. She went to the apartment where Vanessa had lived, but was told she had already left, not paying rent and leaving no address behind. She was given a box by the landlord, a box containing the things Vanessa had left. And when she brought it home, Evelyn did not have the courage to open it, because she still wanted to believe her daughter would come back to take it. But time did not wait for her belief. Ryan began to change. He no longer asked about his mother and only observed in silence. Lily stopped speaking for days, and Noah developed a persistent cough that kept Evelyn awake many nights caring for him. Money became an even greater problem, as the cost of raising 3 children far exceeded her means. She had to sell the few valuable possessions she had left, take on extra cleaning work on weekends, and rely on neighbors when she could not stay home. But the hardest part was not the financial struggle. It was the questions she could not answer honestly without hurting the children. Ryan once asked if he had done something wrong for his mother to leave, and Evelyn could not answer because the truth was too cruel for a child. In the present courtroom, Evelyn recounted all of this, her voice not loud, but each word clear and carrying the weight of the years that had passed. Vanessa sat motionless, no longer reacting as strongly as before, because the memories Evelyn spoke of were not something she could completely deny. The lawyer Richard tried to steer the story back into a legal direction. But the more he spoke, the more he realized this was no longer a simple custody dispute. It had become an indictment of responsibility and choice. Evelyn said she had waited for months, hoped for years that Vanessa would return, but eventually she realized that waiting no longer meant anything when she opened the box. Vanessa had left behind. Inside were not just documents, but evidence of a deliberate decision, a preparation for leaving permanently. And as Evelyn reached this point, the entire courtroom no longer saw her as a defendant, but began to see her as the only witness to the truth. Vanessa lowered her head, tears falling, but no one could be sure anymore whether those were tears of regret or of someone losing control. Evelyn ended her account with a simple statement that she did not choose to become the mother of those 3 children, but when they were left behind, she chose not to turn her back. And it was that choice that led her to this day, where she was called a kidnapper, while all she had done was refuse to abandon children who had no one else to rely on. The years that followed did not pass peacefully, but stretched out like a silent battle, where every day Evelyn Brooks woke up facing a single question: how to raise 3 children without any support from the mother who had given birth to them. She had no choice but to become many people at once: a grandmother, a mother, and a worker. In the morning, she prepared simple meals for the children. At noon, she tried to keep the house in order. In the afternoon, she brought them home from school. And in the evening, she took on cleaning work for other families, jobs that at her age she should not have had to do anymore. But her circumstances did not allow her to be weak. Ryan gradually became the emotional support of the family, even though he was just a child. He helped her watch over his siblings, helped with chores, and tried not to ask for anything beyond her ability. Lily withdrew into her own world where she searched for safety in small things, and Noah was often sick, leaving Evelyn sleepless through many nights. There were times she had to sit by his bedside until morning, her eyes red but not daring to leave, afraid that if she turned away for even a second, the worst might happen. Money was always a heavy pressure on her shoulders. Her small pension was not enough to cover food, clothing, school fees, and medicine. She was forced to sell the last of her treasured belongings, things she had kept her whole life, but which now meant less than ensuring the children could eat and go to school. There were days she had to choose between buying medicine for Noah or paying the electricity bill, and each time she felt as if she was failing in her role as a protector, but she had no right to give up, because if she fell, there would be no one left for the children. In the courtroom, Evelyn recounted all of this. Her voice did not need to be loud because the truth itself carried enough weight. Those listening began to change the way they saw her. No longer a stubborn woman, but someone who had fought in silence for many years. Vanessa sat quietly, no longer arguing, because what Evelyn said was not something she could deny. The lawyer Richard tried to argue that sacrifice could not replace legal motherhood. But even he realized that argument was weakening in the face of such a clear reality. Evelyn went on to describe one of the hardest moments when Noah suffered severe pneumonia and had to be hospitalized. The hospital required legal documents, parental signatures, and health insurance, things she did not have. She stood at the admissions desk feeling helpless as she realized that her love and care were not enough to make her role legal. It was then that she understood, if she did not act, one day she might lose the right to protect the children she had raised. She decided to use the little money she had left to hire a lawyer and begin the process of seeking legal guardianship. It was not an easy decision because it meant accepting that Vanessa might never return. The process was long and difficult. She had to prove that she was the only one who had cared for the children, that their biological mother had not contacted them for a long time, and that granting her guardianship was in their best interest. Throughout that time, she still held on to a small hope that Vanessa would appear, would object, would prove her wrong, but no one came. There were no calls, no response from Vanessa. In the end, the court granted guardianship to Evelyn 3 years after Vanessa left. A decision made not because she demanded it, but because there was no one else to take responsibility. In the present courtroom, as Evelyn mentioned this, the judge carefully took notes and began to see the story from a different perspective. No longer a simple dispute, but the consequence of a chain of actions over many years. Ryan behind her looked at her with pride mixed with pain, as he realized for the first time what she had endured. Lily quietly wiped her tears, and Noah held tightly onto his brother's hand, as if searching for safety in this chaotic moment. Evelyn ended her account with a simple statement that she was not a hero. She was just someone who did not walk away when she had the chance. And it was that choice that made her the only person standing between the three children and a world that might have completely abandoned them. The wooden box lay still on the table, but its weight was no longer physical. It was the weight of what it was about to reveal. Evelyn Brooks did not rush to open it further. She let the silence spread through the courtroom long enough for every gaze to settle on her, because she understood that some truths do not need to be shouted. They only need to be placed at the right moment in the right place to change everything. Vanessa sat frozen, her hands clenched so tightly that her nails pressed into her skin. She knew exactly what was about to be uncovered, but had no way to stop it. Judge Harold Bennett looked down at the papers before him and then up at Evelyn, his eyes no longer neutral, but carrying the caution of someone who had just realized he was facing a story far more complex than it first appeared. Evelyn continued, her voice lower but clear. She said that after receiving the box from the former landlord, she had not opened it right away because she still wanted to believe Vanessa would return, that everything was only a temporary mistake. But time passed without any sign, and in the end, she was forced to face the truth. She recounted that when she opened the box, the first thing she saw was not clothes or personal items, but letters, carefully folded and tied with a small string, as if the writer had thought very carefully before placing them there. Evelyn picked up the bundle of letters. She did not read them immediately, but looked at Vanessa once more, her eyes no longer searching for answers, but confirming that what she was about to say could not be denied. Vanessa shook her head slightly, as if to deny it even before the truth was spoken. But her silence was the clearest admission. Evelyn began to recount the contents of the letters. The first letter was written just a few weeks after Vanessa left. In it, she said she had met a new man named Jason Miller and was moving to another city to start a new life. She said that this man did not want to take on additional responsibilities and required her to resolve all ties from her past before they could move forward. Murmurs began to rise in the courtroom, but Evelyn did not stop. She continued that in that letter, Vanessa did not ask about the children, did not ask if they were healthy or had enough to eat, but only mentioned that she needed time and asked Evelyn to continue caring for them longer than expected. The judge began writing more quickly, while the lawyer Richard showed clear signs of tension as he realized the narrative was slipping out of control. Evelyn moved to the second letter, her voice growing firmer as she said that a few months later, Vanessa wrote again, informing that she was pregnant with Jason's child and could not return because doing so would destroy her new life. She emphasized that in this letter, Vanessa referred to the three children as burdens of the past, a phrase that silenced the entire courtroom. Ryan, behind her, clenched his hands. Lily turned her face away, and Noah did not fully understand but felt the heaviness in the air. Vanessa broke into tears, but no one was convinced by them anymore, because the words just revealed had painted a completely different picture of her. Evelyn continued without giving Vanessa a chance to interrupt. She said the third letter was the one that made her understand. Everything was over. In it, Vanessa asked her to sign certain documents to officially sever all ties between her and the children. In return, she offered to send a small amount of money as compensation for the initial expenses. Evelyn paused briefly, not out of emotion, but to let everyone grasp the meaning. A mother not only walking away, but attempting to legalize her disappearance. The lawyer Richard stood to object, but his words seemed weak under the judge's gaze as he carefully read each line of the documents. Evelyn said she refused that offer. She wrote back that she did not need money, thought that the only thing she wanted was that if Vanessa truly chose to leave, then she should do it completely and only return when she was truly ready to be a mother. She then took out the final letter, her voice lowering further, as she spoke of its contents. In that letter, Vanessa wrote that she would not return, that Evelyn should raise the children as her own, and if anyone asked, she should say their mother had gone far away for work and could not come back. A cold ending like a sentence signed without hesitation, the judge set the papers down, his expression more serious than ever, while Vanessa collapsed onto the table, no longer able to respond. Evelyn looked at her daughter, not with anger, but with a deep sorrow. She said that for 12 years she had kept those letters, not to use against Vanessa, but because she still hoped that one day her daughter would return for the right reason. Not for benefit, not for pressure, but for love. She ended with a simple statement that left the entire courtroom in silence, that she had waited 12 years for Vanessa to return as a mother. But the only thing that returned today was a stranger carrying a lawsuit and a completely different purpose. And in that moment, no one doubted that this was no longer about custody, but about a truth buried for far too long, finally brought into the light. The silence in the courtroom was no longer one of anticipation, but had turned into an invisible pressure weighing on everyone present. Because after the letters had been read, no one could look at Vanessa Brooks the same way again. And in that moment, Evelyn knew it was time to say what. For 12 years, she had never imagined she would have to use in court. She did not rush. She simply reached into the wooden box once more, her movement slow but decisive. Drawing every eye toward her, Vanessa lifted her head, her face pale, no longer carrying the composure she had before. She knew that what came next was the most dangerous part. Judge Harold Bennett leaned slightly forward as if he too sensed that the story had not yet reached its deepest point. Evelyn took out another set of documents, thicker and neatly clipped. She placed it on the table before her and looked straight at Vanessa, her gaze no longer sorrowful but sharper than ever, like someone who had been forced to cross the final line to protect what she loved. She began to speak, her voice steady, each word carrying the undeniable weight of truth. She said that for 12 years she had not searched for Vanessa, not because she did not want to, but because she respected the decision Vanessa herself had written in those letters. She had believed that if one day Vanessa returned, it would be out of love for her children and not for any other reason. But 2 months ago, everything changed when Vanessa suddenly appeared at her door with a lawyer and a demand to regain custody. The courtroom stirred because this was the first time the present timeline had been clearly introduced. Evelyn continued, saying that what made her suspicious was not Vanessa's return, but the timing of it. After 12 years of complete silence, her sudden appearance at this exact moment could not be a coincidence. The lawyer Richard immediately stood to object, arguing that this was speculation without basis. But Evelyn did not waver. She opened the file and said that what she was about to present was not speculation, but the result of a lawful investigation. She explained that after Vanessa appeared with legal demands, she had hired a private investigator to look into her daughter's current life. Not to harm her, but to protect the children from risks she could not yet see. The judge asked her to continue, and Evelyn began to read each detail, her voice not loud but clear enough that every word echoed through the still room. She said that according to the report, Vanessa was currently living with Jason Miller, the man mentioned in the earlier letters, but their financial situation was in serious crisis. 6 months ago, Jason lost his job. 4 months ago, they received an eviction notice, and over the past 3 months, they had been surviving on loans and credit cards, with total debt exceeding $30,000. The tension in the room deepened as the numbers were spoken. Vanessa sat frozen, unresponsive, as if drained of all energy. Evelyn did not stop. She said that most notably, immediately after learning about an inheritance from a family uncle, Vanessa contacted a lawyer and began exploring the possibility of regaining custody. The judge frowned, clearly recognizing this was no minor detail, but a critical link in the entire story. Evelyn continued, saying that this inheritance was worth $300,000 to be equally divided among the 3 children. And by law, the money had to be managed by their legal guardian until they came of age. She paused briefly and looked directly at Vanessa, her voice sharpening as she asked whether this was the true reason her daughter had returned. Vanessa broke into tears, but could not give a clear answer. The lawyer Richard attempted to object, but his voice was no longer steady. Evelyn went on, saying she did not rely solely on the investigation report, but also had direct evidence from Vanessa herself. She recounted that 1 week before the trial, Vanessa had called her for the first time in 12 years. The call initially sounded like remorse. Vanessa said she had changed, that she wanted to start over and give the children a better life. But when Evelyn mentioned the inheritance, Vanessa's tone shifted completely. Evelyn said Vanessa admitted the money belonged to the children, but also claimed that as their mother she had the right to manage it, and even proposed splitting the money if Evelyn agreed to transfer custody. The entire courtroom could hardly believe what they had just heard. The judge set his pen down and looked directly at Vanessa, his gaze now free of any doubt about the seriousness of the situation. Evelyn concluded her presentation by producing printed messages Vanessa had sent after the call, containing clear threats that if Evelyn did not cooperate, she would sue her for kidnapping and ensure that the court would side with the biological mother, as those words were read aloud. The air in the room grew suffocatingly heavy, because the truth was no longer just a family story, but a coldly calculated plan. Evelyn looked at her daughter one last time in this moment, her eyes no longer angry, but filled with deep sorrow, as she realized that the person standing before her was no longer the daughter she once knew, but someone willing to return only when there was something to gain. And it was that realization that made her decide not to remain silent for even one more second. The atmosphere in the courtroom had now completely shifted from an ordinary legal dispute into an uncontrollable unveiling of the truth. And in that very moment, Evelyn Brooks understood that the hardest part had not yet come, because what she was about to present would not only shake Vanessa's argument, but could completely destroy the image she had tried to build before the court. She straightened her posture slightly, her hand still holding the wooden box, but her gaze more resolute than ever. Judge Harold Bennett watched her closely. He said nothing, yet his silence was itself permission for her to continue. Vanessa sat across from her, no longer resembling someone in control of the situation, but more like someone waiting for a verdict, her eyes flickering between fear and a fragile hope that perhaps something had not yet been revealed. Evelyn took a deep breath and slowly reached into the box one final time, her movement unhurried yet carrying a sense of finality, as if everything had led to this moment. She pulled out another sheet of paper, folded multiple times and marked by time, yet preserved more carefully than anything else in the box. Vanessa saw it and immediately sprang to her feet, the chair behind her screeching as it was pushed back. She shook her head repeatedly, her voice nearly breaking as she pleaded for her to stop. But Evelyn did not stop. This time she no longer hesitated, because she knew that if she did, then everything she had endured for 12 years would never be understood. The judge struck his gavel to restore order, but his eyes never left the paper in Evelyn's hand. She placed it before the court clerk and stated clearly that this was the most important document in the entire story and the one she had kept hidden for many years, not out of fear, but because she did not want the children to learn the truth too soon. The clerk handed the paper to the judge. He opened it, and within seconds, his expression changed completely, from focus to shock, and then to stern gravity. He looked up at Vanessa as if expecting an explanation, but none came. Evelyn continued, saying that the document was a handwritten declaration by Vanessa herself, written 3 days after she left Evelyn's house, in which Vanessa voluntarily relinquished all her rights as a mother to the 3 children. Her voice was not loud, but each word fell like a hammer sealing an undeniable truth. The lawyer Richard immediately stood to object, arguing that the document had no legal validity because it was not notarized or formally recognized in court, but the judge raised his hand to silence him and instructed him to read the content before proceeding. Richard took the paper, his hand trembling slightly as he read each line written in Vanessa's own handwriting. The content was so clear it could not be misunderstood. Vanessa admitted she did not have the financial, psychological, or emotional capacity to raise the children and granted full decision-making authority to Evelyn, while also relinquishing all rights to contact, visitation, and any future claims. As those words echoed through the courtroom, no one could deny the gravity of the situation. Ryan widened his eyes, Lily broke into tears, and Noah simply gripped his brother's hand as if trying to keep everything from collapsing. Vanessa collapsed onto the table, her shoulders shaking with sobs, but no one saw her as a victim anymore. Instead, they saw someone facing the consequences of her own choices. Evelyn went on, saying she had never wanted to use this document because she believed her daughter could change. She believed that one day Vanessa would return out of love rather than obligation or personal gain. But when Vanessa came back with a lawsuit and threats, she realized she had no choice but to speak the truth. The judge asked whether there was any witness who could confirm that the document had been written in a sound state of mind, and Evelyn replied that there was, Mrs. Darlene Hayes, the former landlady, who could confirm that Vanessa had written the document herself after requesting paper and pen, and that she was fully conscious at the time. This information left the lawyer Richard with little room to argue. He could only stand there, his expression tense as he realized his entire strategy was collapsing piece by piece. Evelyn did not stop. She said this was still not everything. There was one more thing that needed to be revealed, something she had only recently discovered, but which explained most clearly why Vanessa had returned at this moment. She took out a smaller set of documents from her handbag and said that according to the latest investigation, Vanessa and Jason were on the verge of losing everything. Buried in debt with no stable income and desperately searching for a way out, she looked directly at Vanessa, no longer avoiding but confronting the truth head-on, that her return was not driven by maternal love, but by a final financial opportunity. The courtroom fell into complete silence as all the pieces fell into place, and no one could deny the full picture unfolding before them. A mother who had abandoned her children, voluntarily relinquished her rights, and returned only when financial gain was involved. Evelyn concluded her statement with a simple yet powerful sentence. She was not here for revenge, but to protect the children from being hurt once again. And in that moment, no one saw her as a defendant anymore, but as someone who had stood firm for years just to keep 3 children from being swept away by the decisions of others. The entire courtroom fell silent after the final truth was brought into the light. But what made the atmosphere even heavier was not the documents or the accusations. It was the eyes of the 3 children sitting behind Evelyn Brooks. Because at this point, the story was no longer just between adults, but had reached the hearts of those who had once been left behind and grown up in a void no one could fill. Judge Harold Bennett looked toward the children. He hesitated for a brief moment, as if weighing the law against what was right, then finally spoke in a low voice that he wanted to hear directly from those most affected by this case. Vanessa immediately lifted her head, a fragile spark of hope flashing in her eyes. She believed that no matter what, her children would still choose her because she was their biological mother, and that bond could not be completely replaced. But Evelyn said nothing. She simply turned to look at the 3 children, her gaze neither forcing nor pleading, only giving them a choice she had protected for 12 years. Ryan was the first to be called. He stood up slowly, each step carrying a maturity far beyond his age. He did not look at Vanessa at first, but straight at the judge, his voice calm, yet filled with emotion, as he said he remembered his biological mother, but those memories were faint and tied to instability. He remembered days without enough food, remembered taking care of his siblings when his mother stayed in her room and did not want to come out. And what he remembered most clearly was the day they were brought to Evelyn's home, the day he felt safe for the first time in a long while. Vanessa broke into tears hearing those words, but Ryan did not stop. He said that for 12 years, the only person who had been there for him in every important moment was Evelyn. The one who taught him how to become a responsible man And the person he called mother, not out of obligation, but because it was the truth, the judge asked him who he wanted to live with. Ryan did not hesitate for a single second. He said he wanted to stay with Evelyn because that was the only place he felt he truly belonged. And if his answer could help protect his younger siblings, then he was willing to say it clearly before the court. Ryan returned to his seat, his eyes no longer uncertain, but filled with certainty. Next was Lily. She stepped forward with slightly trembling hands, but her voice was clearer than anyone expected. She said she remembered her biological mother in vague moments. But what she remembered more clearly were the nights she was afraid and had no one to comfort her until Evelyn came into her life. Lily shared that Evelyn had taken her to the doctor when she had health problems, had stayed by her side during her hardest days, and had taught her that family is not where you are born, but where you are loved and protected. Vanessa tried to interrupt, but the judge ordered silence and allowed Lily to finish. She concluded by saying that Vanessa was the one who gave birth to her, but Evelyn was the one who raised her. And to her, that mattered more than any biological connection. As Lily returned to her seat, tears fell from her eyes, but her expression was lighter, as if she had finally spoken what she had carried for so long. Finally, Noah was called. The youngest boy stepped forward awkwardly. He looked at Vanessa for a long moment, as if trying to piece together scattered memories in his mind. Then he said he did not remember much about his biological mother, but he clearly remembered the feeling of being left behind. And he was afraid that if he went with Vanessa, it might happen again. His voice was small but steady, as he said he wanted to stay with Evelyn because that was where he felt safest. Noah's words were not complex or lengthy, but carried a unique weight because they came from the honest fear of a child who had experienced loss. Vanessa could no longer hold herself together. She collapsed onto the table, sobbing uncontrollably. But no one moved to comfort her because everyone understood that what she was facing was not injustice, but the consequence of her own choices. The judge looked at the three children and then at Evelyn. His eyes now held no doubt, only respect for the woman who had stood firm for so long. Evelyn stood there without saying another word. She did not need to, because what mattered most had already been spoken by the very children she had protected. And in that moment, no one in the courtroom could deny that true bonds are not determined by blood, but built over time through sacrifice and unconditional love. Vanessa lifted her head to look at the three children one last time. There was no longer confidence or calculation in her eyes, only a deep pain as she realized that what she had lost could not be taken back through any lawsuit. And it was that realization that caused her to completely break down in the very courtroom where she once believed she would win. No one in the courtroom doubted the direction of the case anymore. But the most important moment had not yet arrived, because even though the truth had been revealed, it still needed an official ruling to bring everything to a close. Judge Harold Bennett sat in silence for several long seconds, as if weighing every detail one final time before making a decision that could change many lives. Vanessa sat across from him with trembling hands and reddened eyes, no longer showing any trace of the confident woman she had been at the beginning. Now only a broken figure remained. Her lawyer Richard stood beside her, but it was clear he had little left to say, because every argument had already been dismantled by the evidence and testimonies presented earlier. Evelyn stood upright, her expression unreadable, yet inside her a storm of the past years surged all at once. She had not come here to win, but to protect. And that alone made her calmer than anyone else in the room. The judge finally spoke, his voice low and measured. He said that after reviewing all the evidence in the presented documents, the letters, the written declaration relinquishing parental rights, the threatening messages, as well as the testimonies of witnesses and the children, he found that this was not merely a custody dispute, but a special case involving abandonment of responsibility and questionable motives for returning. He looked directly at Vanessa, his tone growing more severe as he stated that threatening to accuse someone of kidnapping for financial gain could constitute extortion and should in fact be referred to investigative authorities. The entire courtroom held its breath at those words. Vanessa suddenly rose as if trying to speak, but no clear words came out. Lawyer Richard quickly requested a pause to consider withdrawing the lawsuit, but the judge shook his head, saying that the matter could not simply end with a withdrawal, because what had been presented went far beyond a typical civil case. He turned to Evelyn and asked whether she wished to pursue charges against her own daughter. The question fell heavily because no one could imagine a mother having to make such a decision. Evelyn stood still for a few seconds. She looked at Vanessa not with anger, but with deep sorrow. She saw again the image of her little girl from years ago, and at the same time the woman standing before her now, the two images overlapping yet no longer the same. Finally, she shook her head, her voice soft but clear. She said she did not want her daughter to go to prison. She did not want to turn one mistake into a chain of greater mistakes. She only wanted to protect the children and put an end to anything that could hurt them further. The judge nodded, as if he had expected that answer. He said that the decision reflected compassion, but did not change the nature of the case. He turned back to the file in front of him and declared that Evelyn Brooks's legal guardianship of Lily and Noah was to be permanently upheld, that Vanessa Brooks's request for custody was completely denied, and that Vanessa was prohibited from approaching the children for a period of 5 years unless permitted by the court or by the children's own wishes when they reached sufficient age. The ruling rang out clearly like a final full stop, not only for the case, but for a long and painful chapter. Vanessa collapsed into her chair as if all strength had left her body. Tears streamed down her face, no longer loud sobs, but choked, restrained cries. Evelyn remained standing. She could not say she felt joy because this victory brought no happiness, only relief that the children were finally protected. Ryan stepped forward and asked the judge for permission to say something. And when allowed, he turned to Vanessa, his eyes no longer angry but clear. He said that she was the one who gave birth to them, but not the one who raised them, and that could not be changed by any ruling or any amount of money. He said that if one day she truly changed, they might consider meeting again, but that would have to come from sincerity, not obligation or benefit. Lily and Noah stood beside him without adding anything, but their presence alone confirmed their choice. Vanessa looked at the 3 children she had lost, her eyes filled with regret but also helplessness, because for the first time she realized that some things, once let go, could not be taken back simply by returning at the right moment. The judge struck his gavel one final time to close the session, and people began to stand. Yet no one hurried to leave because they knew they had witnessed something beyond a legal case. It was a lesson about choices and consequences. Evelyn turned to the 3 children. They embraced her instinctively without a word, and in that moment she knew that everything she had gone through had meaning. Not because she had won, but because they had not been abandoned one more time. Three months after the trial, life in Evelyn Brooks' small house gradually returned to its familiar rhythm, but without the lingering anxiety that once shadowed every day. In the afternoon, soft sunlight streamed through the window where Noah sat practicing the piano, his notes still clumsy, yet filled with effort, sounding like proof that these children were growing up in a safe and stable environment. Ryan was busy preparing his college applications, while Lily sat at the dining table with her books open in front of her, her eyes focused, yet occasionally glancing at Evelyn out of habit to make sure she was still there. Evelyn stood in the kitchen stirring a simple pot of soup, but her heart was calmer than it had been in years. because for the first time, she no longer felt that at any moment someone might come and take away what she had worked so hard to protect. The restraining order issued by the court had created a necessary distance, not to punish, but to heal. Ryan no longer worried about being pulled into adult conflicts, Lily no longer feared sudden changes, and Noah could finally sleep through the night without waking in fear. Yet even as life stabilized, Evelyn could not completely remove Vanessa from her thoughts, because no matter what, she was still her daughter. And that bond could not disappear simply because of a court ruling. One afternoon, while cleaning the house, Evelyn received news from Mrs. Whitmore, an old neighbor, that Vanessa was in serious trouble. Jason had left her, taking their young child with him, leaving Vanessa alone in a rundown apartment with a temporary job and unresolved debts. The news made Evelyn stand still for a long moment. Not because she was surprised, but because she felt a familiar pain return. Not the pain of betrayal, but the pain of a mother watching her child go down the wrong path without being able to stop it. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Evelyn sat alone in the living room, the yellow light casting shadows across her face, revealing the marks of time and years of hardship. She thought about everything that had happened, about the choices each person had made, and the consequences none of them could escape. The next morning, she decided to do something even she was not sure was right or wrong. She went to the market, bought some groceries, and drove to the address Mrs. Whitmore had given her. The old building with peeling walls was nothing like any place Vanessa had lived before. Evelyn stood in front of the apartment door for a long moment before gently knocking. Inside there were slow footsteps, and then the door opened. Vanessa appeared thinner, more worn, her eyes no longer holding confidence or calculation, only exhaustion and regret remained. The two of them looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, neither knowing what to say first, because between them lay too many unresolved things. Finally, Evelyn lifted the bag of food and said she had only come to make sure Vanessa was not starving, not to forgive, not to forget, but simply because she was still her mother. Vanessa broke into tears. Not dramatic sobs, but the quiet collapse of someone who had lost the strength to hold herself together. She said she had lost everything: her family, her opportunities, and the children she never knew how to hold on to. Evelyn did not comfort her and did not blame her. She only said that loss was not the end if Vanessa truly wanted to change, but that change had to begin with accepting the truth rather than running from it. She said that if one day Vanessa truly became a better person, not for money, not for pressure, but for herself, then the children might decide for themselves whether they wanted to see her again. When Evelyn left, she did not know if she had done the right thing, but she knew she could not completely turn her back on her daughter, no matter what she had done. When she returned home, Ryan was sitting in the living room waiting. He asked where she had gone, and when he learned she had visited Vanessa, he did not react with anger. He only asked whether that meant she would let Vanessa come back. Evelyn smiled gently and said that compassion did not mean sacrificing the safety of those she had protected. Ryan nodded as if he understood, and in his eyes was a maturity beyond his years. Time continued to pass. 1 year after the trial, life in their small family became even more stable. Ryan entered college, Lily prepared for her future, and Noah grew more confident in his music. The inheritance remained untouched in a trust account, waiting until the children were old enough to decide for themselves. One day, Evelyn received news that Vanessa had started therapy, had found a more stable job, and was no longer trying to approach the children. It did not change the past, but at least opened a possibility for the future. Evelyn stood in her small garden watching the children who were no longer children. She understood that life is not always fair, but always gives each person a chance to choose how they face the consequences of their actions. She had chosen to stay when things became difficult. Vanessa had chosen to leave, and now each of them had to live with that choice. If you are listening to this story, you may also be asking yourself what you would do in a similar situation. Whether you would stay or walk away, whether you would choose responsibility or choose the easier path. And it is those choices that will shape who you become in the future. If you have your own thoughts about this story, Feel free to share them, because sometimes another perspective can help us. This story is not just about a courtroom or a broken family. It is about the choices that each of us must face in life. There are moments when you can walk away when everything becomes too difficult, and there are also moments when you choose to stay and carry responsibility even when it leaves you exhausted and hurt. But it is those very choices that will define who you are when you look back later. If you have followed this far, you likely have your own thoughts about each character, about right and wrong, about what might have happened differently if they had made different choices from the beginning. Share your thoughts, because every perspective has value and can help others understand this story more deeply. If this story has touched your emotions, do not hesitate to support by following the channel so you do not miss the next stories, where every journey carries a lesson and every character reflects a part